Hello and welcome to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Dr. Alan Hyde, and today we are joined by a special guest. She not only contracts with us to do group therapy here at Breaking the Cycle Therapy, but she owns her own practice, and we're going to get into all of that information. She is a young lady who came out of the adoption world and has a lived experience that she's here to share with you guys and with us here in the studio. But today we're joined by April Scales, licensed professional counselor associate, and today we're going to hear her story. April, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, therapist, went through the adoption process. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about just kind of what all that entailed and what drew you to this work, and we'll kind of go into it from there.
Yeah, I think that I think many of us as therapists enter the field because of some of the experiences that we've had, and healing from that, we want to make a difference in some way. And that's the case that it is for me as well. So I actually grew up my first 11 years in and out of foster care, and all the challenges that come with that. I was diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder when I was younger, which now you would never guess. And kind of, I have that lived experience of what it's like to be a kid that has a voice that isn't heard. And so that's one of the things that drew me to the field, is the importance of giving children and teens a voice and making sure that they know that they have a place and that their needs are really important. And it was a long journey to get here, a lot of years of therapy myself, and trying to figure out who I was while trying to attend to my own wounds. But I got here a little later than some of my other peers, but I feel like I'm in the place that I'm meant to be now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, pretty young, and it seems like you found your path overall in the scheme of things pretty quickly as far as becoming a therapist and already talking about contracts and working in some of these private practice settings.
Yeah, I feel like my experiences led me to be certain about the things that I'm passionate about. And so once I found that direction, I just found all the different ways to connect and share my story and get the work that I'm passionate about done.
Yeah. The foster system. Mm-hmm. We'll break down in just a minute for those following along what oppositional defiant disorder is. We can talk a little bit about that here in just a minute. But what works, what doesn't work about the current foster system and when you were going through it?
Yeah. I think it's really not child-centered. So there's a lot of moving from home to home. When I was younger, this isn't the case as much anymore, but when I was younger, foster homes could have up to 12 kids. Now it's limited to 6, but it really creates this space where these kids who have high needs for attention, attachment, care are invisible. They don't get those needs met. And the moving from one place to the other, there's just so much instability. And a lot of foster parents don't know how to provide a safe place that's conducive to healing for children that have been through trauma. Because there are a lot of things developmentally that happen that adults might perceive as, oh, this kid is just being challenging, or this kid doesn't listen. When in reality, this kid is responding to the world in a way that makes sense for someone who has been through trauma. And it requires a different approach.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of weight when, let's say even a parent is kind of around in the lurch, right? And they're with one parent, right? There's a lot of weight in things like abandonment and neglect that are a huge part of the conversation, especially for foster children who aren't just losing biological parents, but then losing foster parents over and over, which tends to often be the case. What do you think is drawing some of these foster parents in to do some of that? Obviously there's great intentions, right? But then there are people who aren't providing the safest spaces, and that tends to be the larger part of the conversation. what is it that needs, maybe I guess my question is like, what is it that needs to be addressed, talked about, maybe shifted, changed around, like pulling in people to be foster parents?
I think the foster care has gotten better at this, but there could still be some improvement with preparation and support for foster parents, because it's really hard to have foster kids knowing that they could leave at some point. It's really hard to manage all the unique challenges that come with that. And so them having a space where they can learn more about how to work with these kids and be the safe space for these kids, while also having a place themselves to process things, is really important. Another thing, I think sometimes the advertising can be not the best, in that a few years ago I was in Wichita Falls, and I was looking at a magazine, and it actually had an advertisement, and it said, "Need more money? Become a foster parent." And that's not the way
Yeah.
to pull people in that are going to be safe homes for children.
Yeah.
But I think that in many ways, the foster care system, especially in Texas, has so many kids, and there just isn't a huge portion of people willing to provide that space.
Yeah.
And when they try, they end up frustrated with how bureaucratic the system is and how little support they have. And so I think overall, switching the messaging, the advertising, as well as providing that support are going to be really important to bringing in really caring foster parents.
Yeah, and I know sometimes it can seem like the overwhelming percentage of the conversation is the in and out, right? Is that a reciprocal relationship in your assumption or your observation, that it's both on the side of the foster parents and the bureaucratic system as to why the children are being moved from foster home to foster home?
I think there is, part of that is the lack of education. So when people do get challenging kids, when they don't have that support or the education to understand how to respond in more helpful ways. And so there is huge turnover on that end. There's a lot of foster parents who don't feel like they have someone to go to when these challenging situations happen. And so the kids that are struggling the most often end up the ones that are moving the most and getting the most instability, which is the opposite of what they need.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely the paradox. And you kind of look and it's almost like you wouldn't scratch your head because you kind of get it. It kind of makes sense. And at the same time, it's tragic. And our system, truly on the bureaucratic side, is not set up to prioritize, like you were saying in the beginning, the individual, that child. It's hard to love the one who needs it the most, right? And that's kind of the bind that we're in, because the one who needs it the most is usually the one who's the loudest and causing the problems.
Yeah, exactly.
If we would even want to pose it that way, right? It's like a child causing problems is a direct reaction and response to environment. So it's like chicken or the egg. A lot of times they come into these foster homes and it's not the safest environment, on top of already being in that mode that they just kind of settle into certain types of behaviors.
Yeah. And I'm always someone, I believe that children's behavior is always an expression of an unmet need. And so if we approach it in that way, we can come from a more empathetic understanding and try to say, what is this child trying to express? What are they missing? And how can we provide that in a way that encourages more helpful behavior?
Yeah. And there's certainly plenty missing from the conversation, because in our field, we're kind of trained and conditioned to think about these different aspects. Like, there are a lot of kids in the foster care system, but when you look at society, nobody talks about it. And I'm sure you have a felt and lived sense of that, of just kind of like, is our society ever going to talk about me and my experience? And I guess I'm curious what your perspectives are, and like, how do we do that other than stuff like this? How do we start to open up those conversations about the children? How do we start to put them first?
I think that as a society, we're moving in the right direction. And I think, as many problems as social media can cause, I think one of the benefits is that people do have access to more information. And so, like the gentle parenting movement, you can find all kinds of videos on how to use those methods. You can see people who have different perspectives and ideas, different ways of raising kids. And I think that's a big part of it. Just sharing that information out into the world. And then also providing the space for discomfort. Because I think, one of the things I experienced growing up was in order to process trauma, you have to talk about it. And there were definitely times when it probably wasn't the right time for me to talk about it. But there was usually a very common reaction, which is just silence, discomfort. Sometimes people would even say, "Oh, I'm sure you did something to cause that." Because it's hard to picture children going through those really hard experiences and give them the space to have that and to claim that and speak about it. And so I think part of it is providing that space for people who have experienced trauma to share what that was like.
Yeah. And we are moving in the right direction, having a lot of conversations in society, as well as kind of, staying away from the noise of the pushback around some of these conversations. People hear gentle parenting and they're going to, have just as many videos of the critiques of those kind of things as they would for anything else. The funniest part about any of that is like the critique of gentle parenting always leans back towards like these really authoritative, abusive type, explanations for how to raise a kid. And it's not helpful. As when I was a boy growing up, I know that some of the really firm, really aggressive aspects of like physical nature, that didn't translate very well into interpersonal relationships as I got older. A certain sense of predictability and structure is always helpful, but that doesn't need to be met with anger and aggression. And that's a hard sell to this a society that is built on, well, that's what works, right? And we know it doesn't work in the foster care system.
Yeah, I think a lot of us repeat patterns, and so what we grew up with feels comfortable, and it takes a lot of courage and a lot of openness to be able to step back and say, well, maybe my parents hurt me, or maybe they could have responded in a more helpful way, and maybe I can too. And that's a really hard thing to do.
And it's a hard thing to sell to an individual who has never confronted their ego, right? That not only are we going to look at these aspects that have been hurtful, but now we're going to look at the ways in our adulthood where it doesn't work anymore, and it's on me. And that's a hard one too when it's unresolved, right? Because the first thing I want to do is hold accountable the people that need to be held accountable, and the process of healing is actually a backwards process in that. If I hold myself accountable in order to interact properly, to give space for someone to hold themselves accountable, that's an even harder sell, right? That I have to buy something first.
Yeah. And I think it's something that is really built on relationships and experiencing something different. And that's where like the therapeutic relationship can be really helpful, is you provide a different model of what does it look like to be supportive in a way that's not aggressive? What does it look like to hold space for feelings and needs and opinions, even if we might disagree with them? And I think that relationships are such an important piece to working through that as well.
Yeah, definitely crucial, especially to address things like abandonment and neglect. We have to have some kind of mirror. If we don't, we become oppositional. All right. So you had made a mention a little bit of that, and I'm sure even some of your peers that you were around were presenting with some of these behaviors. Having worked with it, I worked at a continuation school early in my career. I'm sure you could imagine I saw a lot of opposition and defiant, just behaviors. For those who've never heard of that, or maybe are dealing with it at home and don't have the words for it, what should they be expecting, and how can they address some of these things?
Yeah, so oppositional defiant disorder, I really believe stems from kids externally processing unmet needs or trauma or experiences, because it can go two ways, right? You can have the kids who they take it internally and they get really quiet and they disconnect and withdraw from the people around them. But there are the other kids who make it external. And so there's a lot of anger, what we see as outbursts, reactions that don't seem to make sense, or they seem over-exaggerated, not wanting to listen to adults and follow instructions. Those are all kinds of things that we see with oppositional defiant disorder. And I think one of the issues is maybe the framing of, instead of approaching it as this kid is struggling to express themselves in a healthy way and to process things in a healthy way, we put the blame on the child. And in some ways that makes it easier, because if it's something wrong with them, then we, like you said, we don't really have to take accountability and change much on our end.
Right.
And it's just easier to place the blame elsewhere.
Always, when I was working in that continuation school, it's like we wouldn't want to point fingers, but it's like when you walk into a classroom that's been destroyed by a kid who we know, right, here's the IEP, or here's, right, how we're walking through some of the behavioral interventions, and the teacher has ignored all of it. I wonder why the chair got thrown through the window. There's one of the things that I've always found endearing, but also just kind of fascinating about children with behavioral issues, is that they're very predictable in the patterns when you pay attention. And if you care enough on a given day to pay attention, the child is going to tell you what they need, and they're going to tell you what their behaviors if they've been hurt a lot. And really, it's a matter of, you just got to hang in there. Like, no matter what the case is, kids when they're in that space, and I'm sure you would agree with this, is like, in the beginning, it's a test to see if you're going to stick around. They are going to ask you with their behaviors, will you put up with me? And I would just caution and encourage as well adults that, like, what a profound question that a child is asking you with their behaviors, because of how many other adults have said, yeah, no, I'm out, which is tragic.
Yeah, and it becomes, when it's repeated enough, it becomes a message to themselves of like, I am bad, something's wrong with me, I'm unlovable, and then that pattern just repeats itself. But it really does take consistency and patience and boundaries on the side of the adults to help provide a supportive space for kids to move out of that and move towards healthier ways of expressing themselves. And that's what builds trust, is providing that space.
Yeah. And never underestimate how small the actions need to be for there to be like a real impact. And we hear those kind of things as therapists all the time. But I think a lot of people who don't work with people lose sight of that you just engaging in an act of loving kindness really actually had a pretty deep impact on this person you just engaged with. And it has a pretty deep impact even further on children. As those little islands of predictability of like, oh, there's the person who always listens to me, or there's the one who always has a smile on their face versus the one who's always disappointed to see me.
Yeah, it really creates a different model. And that's one of the things that I live by is I can't always change the circumstance that the children and teens that I work with are in, but I can show them a different way of being and interacting. And I can attune and show them that they are valuable. And there have been cases where really bad things are happening at home, and my power in that is very limited, and I've done what I can, and all I can do at that point is be there for the child or the teen, listen, validate, and let them know they're not crazy and that the experiences they're going through are not okay. and they can expect something different.
Yeah. That it does get better and that they will have some autonomy and choices more and more as life goes on, but it's hard to see that in the moment.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where the modeling really comes in. So like in my office, I try to give as many choices as possible. And I try to show that, like, sometimes I'm wrong. So when I'm wrong, I admit it. And that in itself, I think for a lot of kids and teens, when they experience an adult saying, "You're right, I'm wrong," it makes such a big impact.
Yeah.
And it really builds that attunement and that relationship.
Yeah. I mean, look, the urge, even with other adults in my life, to, even when I know I'm wrong, to be like, nah, I'm right.
Yeah.
I'll just wait for you to admit it. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, the urge is there for all of
It
us,
is.
you know, and we have to challenge that. But like, that is
Yeah.
very potent, very powerful for especially teenagers, because, you know, they're going to meet you on that front and go to war with you.
Yes.
They want to be right too.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And they may not understand even sometimes why they're right or why they're wrong, but teenagers, and this is the one for the parents, is like, sometimes your teenager or your child is the one who's right. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, I think we see a lot of that on a societal level of like, people want to be divisive and who's right, who's wrong. It's like, what if the truth was in the middle, as truth often operates as a definitive fact on multiple planes, and we all have our experiences and interactions with it, and we can all be right in our own little ways and wrong in our own little ways. What if that was reality? I think just observing parents over years and years, the urge is really strong there to be like, no, I'm right because I'm the parent.
Yeah.
Versus you may be right as the child, but here's the direction we're going. It's a different perspective.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's a newer one because historically, as a society, you know, we've had the messaging that children should just be quiet.
Yeah.
Just
Seen and
listen.
not heard.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's a pattern that we're working towards breaking, but it's still very prevalent. And it takes away a lot of autonomy from children and teens and discourages their own critical thinking and growth into adulthood. And it's such an important piece of just being human, is having choices and feeling like you can express your opinions and what you think is right.
Yeah. Well, I think it's always a powerful experience too, to watch like a preteen or a teen interacting with a group of adults. They want to be a part of the conversation. They want to share their ideas, and there is a lot of autonomy in that. And they're going to have to start to do that if they're not already being confronted by that in middle school and high school, where you need to be likable and you need to a relative degree, be able to express your thoughts. And that becomes extremely crucial pretty much right after high school, because now you're out in the world, and if you can't express your thoughts, you're going to find yourself in a little bit of trouble in job interviews, in college applications, and writing essays. You're going to run into that instantly, and if you can't do it, you know. And so there's a lot of those kind of old entrenched ideas that set young adults up for failure. And that's before we even talk about, like, well, especially with men, right? If you can't express your thoughts because you can't feel your feelings, you're going to have a real hard time in any type of like relational aspect. But it's especially true in these environments where children are being kind of shuffled along in the foster care system.
Yeah, places where they have no power and their voices are often not heard even more.
Yeah. Why don't we dig in just a little bit here? And there's many reasons that a child would end up in the foster care system, but what are some of the big reasons that children end up in the foster care system that those listening along should be aware of?
So some of the major reasons are abuse of some type, primarily physical. I will say one of the flaws of the foster care system is that they let things go on for longer than needed, and intervention is slow, and a lot of kids fall through the cracks. But abuse is a major one. Parents struggling with substances is a major one. if parents can't afford to get their children's needs met, or they're neglecting their children. Those are some reasons. And so there's a variety of reasons why kids are put into foster care.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the list could be endless, but there are kind of the main players, which is always interesting. I come back to like that ad that you said that you saw in the magazine where it's like, hey, need some more money? Who do you think you're going to draw in with an ad like that? Not the person who has the stable environment that a kid like that would need, but somebody who's probably already struggling with not the greatest life prioritization skills, which lend to things like substance use, unpredictable abuse, anger outbursts, all these kind of things that Child Protective Services is going to be kind of in and out like a revolving door at that point.
Yeah. The kids are going from one unstable situation to another unstable situation.
Yeah. Which is scary. I mean, I think this is a point too that I'm sure you would speak on and talk with kids much more, but like getting adults sometimes to acknowledge even moments in their own stable home where it was two parents, where there was a lot of fear that led to scary moments, parents yelling at each other, right? Abuse on any, kind of level, of just how terrified a child really gets. And a big one, before you get into all the little nuances, is being ripped up and moved somewhere else by adults that you may or may not even really fully know. And that happens a lot with Child Protective Services, where it's like you want to trust these people, but you may or may not even know your current representative or if they're still working with the agency, and now they're coming in, taking you and moving you somewhere else. The fear that a child might experience in that is pretty profound into adulthood.
Yeah, there's loss on so many levels.
Yeah.
Even I think of often even just your belongings. Like a lot of times belongings that kids become attached to aren't all brought from home to home. And so kids really don't have just one thing that they can hold on to. No real adults, no belongings. And it's a very lonely and isolating position for them to be in.
Yeah. And there's, again, another million reasons why, but why do you think that is, that the time isn't being taken to make sure that the child gathers all their belongings? Is it really just kind of boiled down to that person's on the clock and they need to get you in and out of that house?
I think so. I think a lot of social workers are really overworked and underpaid, and they have so many kids and caseloads to be worrying about that there just really isn't that time to put that thought in. And again, it's another situation where the kid kind of gets lost. There was a case in Texas where one of the social workers was supposed to send someone to a home visit to check for abuse. And because of the caseload, the high caseload, she thought, oh, well, this one seems fine. Last time I checked, and so I don't need to do this, and I'll just brush it off. And that parent ended up killing the daughter. And I don't think that the caseworker wasn't thinking this was going to be the situation. They weren't, predicting that this is what would happen. But because of the high caseload and the need to prioritize and get everything done, it was just a kid that slipped through the cracks. But those slips can be major for those kids.
Yeah, final. That's why, with young social workers too, I've always kind of taken the stance of like, if your life is busy in other areas and doesn't permit to go on every single call, then you probably should be working in a different aspect of this field than doing like out in the community social work, because you really can't afford not to go on a call. If it's been deemed that the call needs to be responded to. And then there's the human aspect of like, who's at fault. It's like, well, really no one other than the person who violated that child. That's where we want to make sure that the conversation is still being focused on, because it can't be on the social worker.
Yeah.
Nothing gets changed if the focus is on, well, this social worker should have been there. It's like, no, these things shouldn't be happening to a child, period. Unfortunately, they do. And our system is just not set up to properly address it. And that's not a social work issue.
Yeah.
That is I guess at the end of the day, you'd call it a democratic issue. The things that have been voted on over a millennia aren't working. And they don't, there's a lot of hope in this. I want to be very clear, because these are some areas where I can get real passionate of like, well, everybody wants to have the conversation, but then when it comes to practical implementation of proper services, we don't know what we're doing. The government certainly has no desire to know what they're doing to help children in these environments. And, hopefully they don't come busting through the door, but it can't be on the social worker, the one person who is trying to be there for these children, because then nothing changes.
Yeah, it really is, I think, on the system and increasing education and access to resources. It is not the social worker's fault.
Yeah.
And in fact, many social workers, you really don't even need a degree in child development to become a social worker. You can have a bachelor's in arts and become a social worker. And so I think there's some lack of education provided in that area. And so many social workers don't even feel fully prepared to respond or handle these situations.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest bummers too is we have the infrastructure as a country to make these things better, that's the disappointing part. It's I think a lot of times you'll hear the conversation of people get pissed off and they say things like, oh, well, the country sucks and things like that. It's it's a pretty great country. We have the infrastructure and the money if we really wanted to solve this. The real problem is that the conversation, when it was in its real meaningful places, people don't want to have that conversation. They don't want to have the conversation that the child has the needs, because the child needs to be seen, not heard. All right. And like you were saying with patterns, most of, I would say, even decision makers on these things, they were that child. All right. Especially in really regimented, structured homes that lend to financial success or political success, if you will. They were the child that was seen and not heard. So they're not even going to think about the fact that there are children in even more dire straits that are experiencing exactly that and how to help them. So it's not a matter of do we have a good enough government? It's a matter of are we even having the right conversations, or do people even care to have the right conversations? Yeah. Typically, no. There's no money in it. So what do you do? Yeah. It's unfortunate.
It really is.
But you came through it and put together quite a life that you're currently building, and it's fun to watch as I've gotten to know you. And I find a lot of hope in that, that even in a system that doesn't do things as properly as we would hope, that there are plenty of people that are going to come out of this and give back in the way of service. Do you find that as a spiritual path for you? Do you find it as just kind of separate from spirituality? How do you conceptualize why you've been led on this path when others haven't?
I think there's a mixture of things going on, because I also have siblings, and they did not end up with some of the things that I did. So they did not end up adopted. And
biological siblings.
Biological siblings, yeah. And they are not in good positions. And so I think that I have been able to have more resources and support. So I had a consistent therapist for 11 years and really was able to build that trusting, safe relationship with her. I had access to different resources, and whenever I was a big reader, so whenever I would want a book, my parents would be like, okay, yeah, go ahead. And I was a learner. I loved learning. And whenever I had a question about the world or why things are the way they are, I had access to the resources to find out. And I think I got very lucky in some ways. that helped me pull through. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this, is because I really do truly believe that it just takes a couple of adults to model something different and see the strengths in that kid and help encourage those strengths and build that resilience for that kid to make it through. Because humans have gone through trauma for thousands and thousands of years. But what brought us through that was our community and a system of support. And I really think that that's what helps people heal through trauma and find that reconnection to themselves.
Yeah, there's a nugget of wisdom in what you shared too, as to, if anyone's ever wondering, like, why does therapy seem to work for people, is because it really does only take a cracking open of that door to find community. It takes that one or two couple people that start to share with you lived experience wisdom. And sometimes I guess the best way to put it is like, you find some people who are willing to meet you where you're at, so that then we can graduate into being around people who have been where we're at.
Yeah.
That kind of a community with people who've been where we're at and are living in healthy ways is true growth. For some people, it's a real spiritual awakening. For other people, it's just a real deep growth in wisdom in their life. But without it, people struggle.
Yeah. And I think especially for people that have been through some type of trauma, I think you kind of lose a sense of identity. And so to have somebody else who sees those strengths in you when you can't, and like helps pull them forward, it reconnects us to who we are.
Yeah, I'd say so. Which in any type of conversation around trauma that we've had on this channel, I think anybody who follows along consistently with the guests, there is a buzzword, if you will, but just I think a really potent word is identity that gets brought up consistently around these conversations, and how important it is. I was talking with a client the other day of like, a really good thought experiment is like, no matter what it is that you want in the future or what it is that you've done in the past, when you sit and ask yourself today, do I know who I am? Right? Not what you do and not what your profession is and how much money you make and I'm in this relationship, but that true conversation of inherent worth and value. All right. And when you say those things out loud and even give the prompt, the person could be like, oh, well, yeah, I get that. But there's a different sense in knowing when you actually sit and confront yourself in regards to your own worth and value. And you can assess pretty quickly where you're at with it if you're paying attention. And it takes practice. Like you said, you had that therapist in the process for 11 years. It's like these are the kind of timeframes we're talking about when you struggle with areas of self-esteem in profound ways. It's like you got to stick in there and look at yourself for long periods of time.
Yeah, it was really interesting. When I graduated from my undergrad, I had a focus in psychology, and I knew that I liked psychology, and I was curious about why people are the way they are, but I had no idea what I wanted to do with that.
Sure.
And you can't do really anything with like a psychology bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
And so when I graduated, I watched as all my friends were moving on to their like professional careers, and I just felt so lost. I was doing work at Target and retail. I was doing a bunch of different marketing and sales gigs, and I had no idea who I was, because all these years I had been like trying to like cover up these wounds, and that had been my focus. And when you're focused on that, you don't have time to stop and think, what are the things that I enjoy, or who am I? It's about, how do I make other people love me, and how do I keep people in my life? And I remember having this conversation with my dad, and I said, I feel so behind. I feel inferior in many ways to my peers because they seem to have it all figured out, but I don't. And my dad said, April, your first 11 years of life, you couldn't stop and think about who you are. Like a lot of kids are thinking about, oh, would I like being a teacher? Or they're, putting on fireman outfits and exploring these identities. And when you're going through trauma, you don't get that opportunity. And so he said, I think I was like 23 at the time, and he said, April, you're basically 12 years old. You had 12 years to explore who you are and the interests that you like while trying to heal and deal with this trauma you've experienced and like figuring out what does this mean. And that really resonated with me. And I think it's true. You know, you kind of need some disconnection from that traumatic experience to be able to reconnect with who you are and figure things out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's like that's where maybe you wander in and you're working on some trauma with a therapist and they use a term like reprocessing. You know, it's like we are starting at the points in which we got stuck in order to get ourselves unstuck and grow into a level of maturity that allows us to parent ourselves. And it's like, ding, dad hit the nail on the head, and leave it to a dad who cares about a daughter. You know, it's like they don't need any training in the world. They tend to have some really good things to say, and people do when they actually care. And I think that's where a lot of the hope is like, anybody who is in a stable spot thinking about being a foster parent or really just kind of like meeting their kids where they're at, it's like it doesn't take much except for a willing heart, right? To see another human being, to allow them. I was thinking about this as you were sharing. It's like to allow a kid to try on those different identities, because there's a lot of maturing and challenges. You know, when I see a kid struggling with something, my inclination is to like, oh, let me help you with that, except for the fact that there's a lot of dignity in being able to determine how to peel an orange. You know, they don't need my help. They may have questions, but they need their hands on it. And then there's this other aspect, and then I'll shut up and hear what you have to say on this, but it's like, as you've come in here and agreed to do some contract work and you have your degree and you're working towards your license and you're this young woman, it's like from the outside perspective, here's this young woman who had the 12 years, right? And was kind of those 11 years in the beginning of your life. And you may have these moments that I'm hearing you share of like questioning, you know, am I behind peers in those early moments? And it's like everybody else is kind of looking like, look at this young lady putting it all together. You know, it's like we don't see ourselves. I've even like starting the practice here, I've had those moments where I'll look at other people's practices and I'm like, man, why am I so far like different or behind? And it's like, because I'm different. You know, the way that I'm doing my practice might be different from someone who's doing it 2 blocks over. That doesn't mean I'm behind or any worse or better. It just means that I am who I am. And I have to remind myself that kind of stuff every day, because if I don't, my mind will let me believe they're doing better. They've got something figured out that I don't, right? They're a better person. It's like none of those things are true. That's all false. We make it up in our own heads.
Yeah, I think we're our worst critics.
Oh, yeah.
And we give a lot more grace to other people than we do to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's take a pivot for a moment. This is more so just kind of a place of curiosity. When you were in the foster system, so you had biological siblings, did they facilitate you staying in touch with them in any capacity, or how did all that work?
So it gets really complicated.
Sure.
I would say, you know, my experiences are on they were on a very severe end and super complex. So I was able to stay with my siblings for 6 years, and we were adopted. The home was abusive. I was removed. My siblings were left there. And then 4 years later, my brother was removed for abuse, and my sister was left there. And she stayed there until she was 19. And that family did not want us to have any contact. And so...
so like once you left, they were like, okay, you two can't talk to her anymore.
Yeah. That was the last that I saw of them. And I know... I had some very hardworking caseworkers, and CPS did start a case against this family, but it was ruled against me. And children are just so, I think there's a lot of pressure put on the children to be the ones that make this work, like the case work. If a child says, no, this isn't happening, their word is just taken. But most children... are going to say, no, this isn't happening. because they're trying to protect their parents.
Oh, of course.
Like, kids need other adults to survive and have a safe journey, like, into adulthood. They're going to die if they don't have parents.
Yeah, I mean, children need the islands of predictability. There can be some imagination and some impulsivity and some chaos from time to time in the way that a child explores the world, but a child will take abuse as an island of predictability over none.
Yeah.
Right. And so they create those little barriers around protection when CPS comes in, and it takes a good caseworker to really determine, like, what am I seeing here?
Yeah. Yeah. And often in these situations, again, the blame will be put on the child.
Yeah.
And so my previous diagnosis of ODD came up in court and was used against me. And I was seen as a child that was too challenging and couldn't be, like they said they tried as hard as they could to save me and make things better. And this
that makes me
is
want to vomit.
Yes.
Just like even hearing that.
It's so messed up.
Yeah.
And the court took their word over mine. And that's what I mean with, like, children's voices being silenced and not fully being seen for their experiences. And so I lost all contact with my siblings until my brother was removed 4 years later. And then I reconnected with my sister when she was 19. I found her on Facebook. And I tried to have relationships with them, but my brother always saw me as the parent. And there was some, like, push-pull kind of dynamic.
Sure.
And then this family had pitted us against each other when I was there and said a lot of bad things about me. And my sister just was never really fully able to see anything different.
Yeah.
And so it caused a lot of challenges in our relationship.
You're going to have to bear with me. I got a glare in my eye or something from the ring lights here.
Oh, yeah. No,
Sorry,
that's
guys.
totally okay.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, you hear this about all kinds of family dynamics too, but people just, they get pitted against each other. And the hardest thing, I think, for any of us, and this is a lesson even in society, is to look at ourselves. And this would require on all aspects, on all sides, is to look at ourselves and ask where the growth and maturity needs to take place. And that's how relationships connect, as I'm sure you've found more and more in your life, connecting with people as you've grown. Is it like, if the conversation is going to be, well, this is who you were, then we don't have a lot of room to grow in that. The conversation can be that we can't go back to that space, and here are the parameters, right, in where I will stay. And if you want to join me there, great. If not, no hard feelings. But, to hear that a foster family, was kind of getting in there and cultivating that dissension between children, you hear of these things all too often. And again, the question that it begs is the patterns in which those foster parents grew up in themselves, right? And it perpetuating over and over and over again. It's just, this is why we have these conversations, Someone somewhere is going to hear this, and, it's, who knows who it is, but is going to relate and say, like, hey, maybe I don't want to do these patterns anymore. Maybe I really am hurting people. And the answer is, like, with all the love in the world, like, yes, you really are hurting people, and you need to look at yourself. It's how we all grow.
Yeah.
It hurts at first.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a challenge to try to break those patterns and grow.
Yeah. It's like, for all intents and purposes, I've always been a nice guy, It's like, I think you would be able to find, like, even friends from when I was younger, like, oh, he's a nice guy, but he could be an asshole sometimes. It's like, and I needed to look at some of those rougher sides of myself. But certainly in my own family, it's like with my loved ones who struggled with addictions, I loved them, but I could not stop trying to control them. Therefore, I was ripping away all of their dignity. And that's a pretty rotten experience between two people. It leads to a lot of dissension and a lot of resentment. And my own recovery on the family disease of alcoholism side has really taught me the wisdom behind detaching. I don't have to like or enjoy the disease of the addiction, but I can love the person. Yeah. And I just think a lot of people would benefit from that kind of serenity and freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, we can understand where someone is coming from without advocating for what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I think that in itself, having that space for understanding, does let people feel more comfortable coming forward and seeking help when they're ready. Yeah.
Yeah. If you were sitting on Capitol Hill, April, let's say you were the first lady president, and the president actually had power and could make decisions. Would you tear down the foster system and rebuild it, or would you keep it in place the way it is and implement new tools? I don't want to implicate you here because this is on video content, but would you tear it all down and restart with something new, or would you just implement strategic tools that you find are missing?
I think it is easy to say, tear it all down.
Yeah. Anarchy,
Yeah. But the reality is that is so hard to do.
Yeah.
And foster care has come a long way. Originally, foster care was on a train system, and it took children, and it would put the children out in like a public hall, and people would come in, and they'd be like, oh, I want this one or that one. This one looks like he would be really good at farm work, you know? Like, that's how foster care used to be.
I would imagine it still is somewhere like that. I gotta believe it is,
I mean, there's probably some parents.
Yeah. One would
like,
hope not.
What can I get from this kid?
Yeah.
But the system has changed and evolved, and there's still flaws because it does come from very flawed beginnings. But I do think that there are a lot of caring people trying to work on things and improve things, and it takes time, and it takes trying different stuff, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and that's part of the process. Yeah. And so I think foster care does some very good things. Like I didn't have to pay for my college education because the state did. And it matters, and it's important to them that the kids who have been through foster care do get an education and have a way out. But I think there's just things that can change within the system that help kids move closer to that direction.
Sure.
Like the option is there, but I think some of the other barriers in the way might prevent people from really using that option.
Or knowing it's there. Yeah.
Yeah.
The bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Which would be maybe a bigger conversation and maybe just more time on either of our sides as we watch the world unfold. There, as in any industry, there's a private sector and a government sector. Do you think that there would be massive improvements if it was all private sector for the foster care system? Or do you think that the government needs to be involved in these things?
I think that the government is helpful in this situation because I do think private has some positives too, but even organizations within the private industry, a lot of them rely on government grants and government support in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I do think that there are some benefits to the government being a part of the discussion. And so I wouldn't take that away.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's kind of where I settle on it too. It's like in most of the private sector for things like foster care and adoption are, nonprofit organizations who are getting funding from the government. So, there is no conversation right now. I just always think of like in certain other industries, innovation comes from the private sector. And sometimes I wonder, like, if there really was just like a standalone sector for this, what would come of it? Just as a thought experiment, and there are people out there who probably come up with all kinds of wild, helpful ideas, but I guess it's just a matter of, individuals who are really passionate about it, working within the constraints that there are to find those changes.
Yeah. And I do think when it comes to private sector, it's more focused on financial, the financial piece. And that is one of the things that could kind of mess with really genuine good intentions.
Yeah, maybe kids would end up in the hallways again, now that I think about it. Like, you want to buy this one or what? It's like, dang. God, my God.
He's really good with tech.
Yeah. He could build you a website. Yeah. Yeah, he'll even monitor your social media accounts. You want to go viral? I mean, we've done some pretty atrocious things with children especially, but there definitely has been. And I think that's where, as we round out a conversation on this too, is like there is hope. And a lot of kids are finding hope. And anytime you have kids or adults who find hope, you're going to have plenty of the opposite. That's the world we live in. I'm not sure how we change that. I don't know if that's within our power. I certainly choose not to grapple with it too much in the sense of like, well, let me look into all of the information and inundate myself.
Yeah.
Let me work with the constructs and the people that I have in front of me who are seeking hope. And I think if we all do that in our communities, things do get better.
Yeah. I think it can feel really overwhelming, especially with social media, seeing all of the problems that are out there. But realistically, if we limit our scope to something we really care about, and everybody does that, or at least most people do that, then all together we're going to have a big impact.
Yeah, it's like even we've seen it here with the practices, like we're brand new, right? It's like our impact in the community compared to what it will be this time next year, it's minuscule. And the conversations that the chamber has here in our little Tri-City area are like, man, we're so glad that this is here. It's like, that's the power of focusing on your community. Yes, we can be informed, but I've been having a lot of the feeling lately with just kind of social media and just all the bad things that happen. It's like people dying and being assassinated and all these kind of things. It's like, if you inundate yourself too much with that without focusing on being of service in your community, it just gets infuriating.
Yeah.
There are too many things that will pull you towards like, well, damn it, what do we do? Versus, well, here's what I'm going to do within my community. We were never designed, and this is what someone wise had shared in the light of some of the stuff recently that's been going on, like with assassinations and people getting stabbed on trains and stuff, is we were never designed to know about all the happenings in the world. We were designed to be of service to our community. And I think we've lost touch a little bit with that because of all the new, fun, exciting technologies. Maybe a blend is needed.
Yeah, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed and lose sight of that hope. Yeah. But that's something, one of the major things that I think helps with resilience, and what I do with kids and teens is helping them find the little pieces of magic and hold on to those. And I think that if we do that, it does build a more resilient community that feels like their ideas matter and that change is possible. If we move towards the other direction, we just feel overwhelmed and we shut down and then we don't really do anything.
Yeah. And there's social media in a nutshell. It looks like we're doing a lot of things. It's like, but what are we really doing? It's like, even here, when we turn off these cameras, we're running a practice. We're seeing clients in therapy. We're doing group therapy. We're doing individual therapy. We're connecting with people in the community and having conversations on mental health. Social media is great, but there really is a message for any young man, woman, old man, woman, child listening to this is like, get up and have an adventure. Go do stuff and do it locally because there's people who need you.
Yeah, and you can find pretty much something for anything that you're really passionate about. Yeah,
absolutely. I have a question I ask everybody when they're first on the show. We'll see where you go with it. But if we were going to build a mental health amusement park and you got to build a ride in that amusement park, what would it be? What would it do? What would you call it? What color would it be?
This is a really, really hard question, surprisingly. um, uh, I'm not a huge amusement park ride person. I feel like it would probably be something that brings people together and brings out laughter and joy and closer connections, which I'm not sure can be turned into a ride.
Maybe like we could put you in the
A
amphitheater.
theoretical ride. Yeah.
Maybe like a show of some kind.
Yeah, something that's connecting and involves. I'm a big event planner, so that's where a lot of my strength lies, and I love bringing people together and just seeing them let down their guard and be silly and enjoy each other's company.
Absolutely.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Something bright, maybe with unicorns.
Unicorns are
involved, cool. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Well, speaking of events, and just to let you guys know, we'll have you plug your practice here again in a moment. You'll see a lot of things that are growing and changing in us in the community with events and things over the next couple months into the new year. This will not be the last time you see April. She'll be back on the show at some point, as well as you'll probably see her speaking at events that we're doing out in the community. But why don't we take a moment here, tell them a little bit about your practice. They can find your Psychology Today that we put in the description of the video. But tell them a little bit about your practice and where they can find you.
Yeah, so I am currently, my practice is in Farmers Branch. It's called Resilient Hearts Therapy. And I work with children and teens with a variety of issues and challenges, but I mainly focus on trauma, foster care, and adoption because there are unique circumstances and challenges that come with each of those. And so I like to work with the parents as well as the children and teens to really foster communication and connection and understanding. And you can find all of my information online, my hours. I have a website, resilientheartstherapy.org, where you can kind of check out my message and learn a little bit about me and my services.
Very cool. Any last messages while you have a captive audience here that you would like to impart to anybody who might be listening to our discussion today?
I would just say find the magic where you can.
Fair enough. Find the magic where you can. Ladies and gentlemen, we break the cycle here every Thursday at 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Breaking the Cycle is not just a podcast that you can listen in on once a week. We have plenty of content all over social media platforms, and we have a therapy practice here in Hurst, Texas. You can also find information on our website for April and her practice there. She runs groups for us here. We're currently filling those groups for teens who've been impacted either in the foster care system, around the foster care system, or the family disease of addiction. If you want more information, you can find us at breakingthecycletherapy.com or tune back here each week on Thursdays at 12:30 p.m. to get more information. We love you. We'll see you here with another guest next week. Take care.